Hello and welcome back to this week's Leap Weekly webinar. For now, everyone's going to stay on mute and have their videos turned off, but the chat box is open. So feel free to put some questions in there as I'll monitor those. I can answer them throughout, or I might also answer them towards the end of the session here today. We'll be on this for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to cover a lot about feedback. So I always get the question of, well, I really don't want to be providing feedback. What do I do? I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want to hurt the relationship. Or maybe it's for me accepting the feedback. Well, I don't really want to hear what they have to say. I know it's going to be negative. Well, that's completely normal. We actually all, as humans, really do have a fear of feedback. And that's what we're going to be diving into over the next 4 weeks for these Leap Weekly webinars. And today is about why do we have a fear for feedback? And that's going to lead us to these next 3 where we're really going to talk about what goes on in the brain, and then a couple little techniques for setting up and then delivering feedback in an effective way, receiving feedback in an effective way. So I want to start kind of at the beginning of where feedback occurs. And so just think about when you're in school, right? And that first bit of feedback, whether it be from a teacher or a peer, and that the impact that it can have on us emotionally, whether it be good feedback where we receive feedback, or it be negative feedback, and it creates a lasting impact on how we view feedback. However, when you think about school-age children, providing feedback on our education, on how we solved a math problem, how our reading comprehension was, well, that's the only way as a child that we start to learn, okay, this wasn't correct, let's look at it again. Or, okay, here's some guidance on how to do this better in the future when it comes to your equations and things. We're required to get that feedback because otherwise we're not quite sure how to learn and grow from there. And that's what teachers provide to students. You take that a step farther, and I'm sure many of you either played some sort of sport or were in some sort of activity. And you look at, okay, all of those people who play a sport, play an activity, are involved in an activity, are always receiving feedback. That's why you see, you might watch a basketball game and you see there's about as many assistant coaches as there are players. And each one of them can go back to a coach, and you'll see the coach them up, provide them feedback on what they're seeing live in the game, or show them some of the statistics or some of the game plan pieces. And it's because we need the feedback from people who are sitting back, able to look at it and provide the feedback to say, okay, here's how you can perform at a higher level. And so I always say to people, think about Tiger Woods, right? One of the best golfers to ever live, and yet he still has somebody who provides him feedback. He still has a coach who comes out and provides him feedback, gives him some tips, some techniques, some thoughts on how to grow as a golfer, and he's the best golfer in the world. Think about that as we go about how to accept feedback, and that we do all have a fear of feedback, but the people who succeed the most, who have the highest level of performance, are the ones who surround themselves with people who provide honest feedback. Now, take that all the way to work. And our supervisors, our managers, but also our peers and our coworkers are all supposed to be able to provide us feedback. That way we can learn and grow and become more equipped to perform at a higher level, work with customers in a different way, so on and so forth. But we really do have a fear, and it really gets in the way. And so that's what we're going to focus today on, is more of what gets in the way and what are we going to be able to do about it. And so I want to give you a couple of initial thoughts here. So a lot of research shows that we have a lot of fears when it comes to feedback. Some of it's from delivering feedback and some of it's from receiving feedback. So when we look at it, the research really shows that a lot of us fear hurting someone's feelings. And when we look at feedback in a way that we're going to hurt someone's feelings, we're going to approach it wrong. And that's actually something we're going to talk about in 2 weeks when we talk about setting up feedback, because when we set it up with the thought that we're going to go in and hurt someone's feelings, then we're addressing a person, which would hurt their feelings, rather than what behavior, what task, what thing, and how can they improve on that, not about the person. And sometimes we are delivering feedback very personally. Another piece that research shows is really important is that we as humans hate being criticized. And there's a lot of belief that could go all the way back to, okay, in some sort of childhood, you saw the comments as critical, and now we hate being criticized because of it. But that's important to know, both as a receiver, that we often see feedback as critical. And instead of it being critical, like, well, you're not doing this well, we need to look at more, okay, here's the task I did, here are some suggestions, or here's some things that didn't go as well. And so we get too stuck on us and taking things personally. And so that'll be something we work on, is learning how to more objectively look at it and not look at it as such a attack on me, which I am not saying by any means is an easy thing to do. It's really challenging to accept feedback in a way that doesn't feel personal. But when we can shift to not seeing it personally and taking it as it's a behavior, it's part of a task, it's part of a performance, we're able to analyze it differently and accept it and implement it in a different way. Another one it talks about is that there was some research that they did on some of the workplace and what percentage of people had a high fear of feedback. And they found that 12% of people had a high fear of feedback. And that doesn't sound super high, but think about that. 12% of your team, it could be 1 in 10, has a really high level of fear of feedback. That doesn't include any of the people they have a fear of feedback. This was only high. And you take that a step farther, and there were 25% of people under 30 were fearful of feedback. And that's important to understand, because oftentimes when we enter our career, we're more fearful of feedback because it's more of an emphasis on what we don't know, or it's more of a comfort level in our jobs and with the peers and with the people we're trying to prove our skill level and our performance to. And so being aware of that is very important. And then you go forward and you say, okay, from a leader perspective, what occurs? Well, a study of 51,000 leaders really pointed out some of the really important pieces here. And that's where they were measuring, okay, how did their team rate them at giving and receiving feedback? And then how did they rate them on their effectiveness of leadership? And so they used their two scales. And what they found was that when someone received grades of being very poor at receiving and giving feedback, they were in the bottom 12th percentile for their effectiveness as a leader on a scale of a lot of things versus just feedback. And then when you took it and you looked at, okay, people in the top 10% of this giving and receiving feedback who were really effective at it, they were in the top 90th percentile. So feedback, actually receiving and giving, has a lot to do with our effectiveness as leaders, because what we do is we manage people. Being able to give and receive that feedback is extremely important in building and maintaining a relationship between ourselves and the people that we're managing and leading. And so when you look at that, one of the other pieces I thought was very interesting is that there was some research that said 77% of human resource people believe that annual performance reviews are not actually an accurate representation of an employee's performance. And that comes down to things like recency bias, right? Where we only remember the last month of someone's performance. We don't remember a year. Or it may be that we, as the leader or the manager or the supervisor, don't really like confrontation. So we're not going to actually tell you your true performance. We're just going to rate you at a 4 or a 5 all the way through this scale. And so what human resources are moving to is that it needs to be more about consistent feedback and conversation and space that allows us to provide on-the-spot feedback with people, and same for them to us, and be able to create that atmosphere where we can be constantly letting each other know where are we at, how well we are or are not doing something, and what can we do to improve it. Will actually create the type of feedback systems, loops, and culture that would allow you to really make growth in this area. And then the last thing that I thought was really interesting was that when we look at feedback, a lot of times our most fearful situations we're going to deal with are the really negative feedbacks, the things about performance that isn't going well, sales that aren't going well, behavior that needs to change. And what I found very interesting was there was a study done where 92% of people said that if negative feedback is delivered correctly, then it has a positive impact on performance. It actually boosts performance. So 92% of people say, yes, negative feedback can boost performance because it lets me know what's going on. but it has to be delivered correctly. And that's what we're going to deal with in 3 weeks when we really work on delivering powerful feedback. How to really deliver it in a way that is effective for people to hear, that does not shut them down. So as we go through this, when we talk about why do we have a fear of feedback, next week is where we're really going to dive in and we're going to talk about kind of the normality of fear. The fact that we're hardwired for fear and defensiveness. And that's why feedback, we take it personally, we view it as being criticized, we have that internal fear of relationships, of hurting feelings. That's normal. That's how we're hardwired. And so we're going to dive in and say, you know what, we can't just say, toughen up. We can't just say, put on a tough skin and don't care what other people say, because that's not how we as humans are hardwired. We're hardwired to hear what people say and then put it through our own lens of how we see that feedback. If people were critical in our past, we're going to say, oh my gosh, everyone's being critical of me. So we need to become more aware of that and say, okay, what actually occurs inside the brain? What occurs when we hear feedback, give feedback? And then, because we actually learn what causes maybe that we go on the attack or that we get really defensive, some people might start maybe tearing up a little bit or avoiding something. Well, what causes that? And then how do we overcome it? What steps can we take to overcome it? And that's what we'll work on next. And the week after that, we're going to work on setting up feedback. That's going to be our second skill set. And setting up feedback is something that is oftentimes missed. And what setting up feedback actually gives us the time to do is to open up the space in a way that allows for that sharing to happen. It actually sets some expectations. So a lot of times we will set out some of the desired outcomes, some of the things we're really looking to work on. It might be that we really help somebody grow in a certain area, or maybe I'm coming into it asking for feedback and I'd really like to grow in a certain area. And by setting that expectation for this is what we're going to be really focused on, it helps prepare our mind to, okay, here is what we're going to talk about. So we don't go into a situation, all of a sudden we receive this quick feedback and our brain jumps to the negative. And the last thing we're able to do when we set up feedback is we're actually able to quell all that normality, that hardwiring that's in our brains. We can actually take steps, which we will learn in 2 weeks, about how do we actually set up feedback so that we do shut down the defensiveness, that we allow people to say, okay, I can come with an open mind, open heart, and listen to what someone really has to say about my performance so that I can improve. And so it's about setting up feedback, which is actually one of the most important aspects. And then the last one is what everyone wants to jump to right away, which is how do we deliver powerful feedback? How do we actually deliver effective feedback that gets through to people, allows them to hear it, allows them to make changes, but also nurtures and builds relationships? Because that's what feedback is designed to do. It is designed to build relationships when it's done correctly. But we want to know what goes on with feedback. Why do we have a fear first? What's going on in the brain? What causes some of these things so we can learn to shut them down? We have to bring awareness first. And then we have to set up that space right. And then finally, we can learn that third skill of delivering feedback. And it's not about being blunt. A lot of times we are just be honest or sandwich a negative in between two positives. We don't want to see that when we deliver feedback. That's not what it's designed to do. Delivering feedback is about learning how to deliver feedback with a lot of care, right? Compassion for someone, candor, and then a lot of courage, because that's what it takes. So we always talk about there's 3 C's: care, candor, and courage. And that we can't be dancing around the situation. We have to learn how to be able to deliver it in an effective manner that allows it to be heard and then allows us to move forward from it. And that takes a lot of skills, which we'll learn about how do we manage our emotions in the moment? How do we learn to help someone else manage their emotions, maybe as a leader, or maybe we are an employee and we need to help our leader manage their emotions while giving feedback, to understand that it's okay to deliver the feedback. It's okay to understand where we are in our performance so that we have areas to grow and improve. And so over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about, again, the hardwiring of our brain, what really causes us to have that fear. And then we're going to talk about some of the self-awareness things that go into, okay, I'm seeing this come up. Here's what I'm going to do to shift. Next, we're going to talk about setting up feedback, and we're going to have a couple tips and techniques for how do you open the space, how do you set expectations, and then how do you quell someone's fear when they walk in, or even how do you quell your own fear when you're walking into some feedback, when you start to hear some feedback, how do you quell it? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how do we deliver powerful feedback. And I want you to know that this is going to be applicable whether it be in the workplace and you are a leader, or maybe it be in your home life, or with friends, or with other relationships that you have. Delivering feedback is something we all have to be able to both deliver and receive in a way that allows us to build, nurture relationship, but also for ourselves to grow in our performance of whatever it is. And that's what feedback is about. Feedback is really how well you are or are not playing the game of life, playing the game at work. And we want to know, because don't we all want to do our best? We all want to give our best. We all want to perform at our highest level. And so that's what feedback gives us the ability to do. So stay tuned. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to be really focusing on feedback in the workplace, feedback on how it can really help us grow and evolve and reach that higher level of performance. Thank you.